Welcome back, everyone, to the Radical World, the podcast. This is Tulio Siragusa. I'm hosting a Radical Pioneers series. This is episode number 3, and I'm here with Jose Leal. Welcome, Jose. Good to have you again.
Good to see you, Tulio. I'm wearing my Fiat glasses because we're
You're
going to be
wearing your
talking
Fiat
Fiat
glasses.
today. So I just wanted to make sure that I was in the Fiat mood for
All
our
right.
conversation.
For those who may not have seen episode 1 and 2 of the Pioneers, let's quickly recap. We talked a great deal about what radical is in episode 1, and then we dug into the Fiat world. We're not talking about the automaker. We're talking about the system of command and control that dominates the workplace and pretty much everything all around us. Many are familiar with fiat currency. It's the same model, right? So today we're going to go into more details about what it feels like and how it manifests itself to view the world through the fiat lenses, which everyone at some point has either worn or is wearing or doesn't even know that they have them on. But we're going to look at some examples and highlight what it looks like through today's conversation, and hopefully, if we do a good job at it, you'll have a better understanding of the fiat lenses and how it impacts you. It's kind of like the Matrix, Once you understand the Matrix, you know what's going on. The fiat lens is the Matrix, so to speak. So let's go right into it. Let's see how it shows up in our lives. Okay, so for example, what does the fiat lens cause us to see in the world and at work? How does it cause us to see it?
Well, we talked about this in the last episode, right? Like we are trained to build this fiat lens, right? Like it's built, it's in our heads. It's actually not on our eyes, right? And it's built from our parents, our teachers, our friends in our community, teaching us that the world is about command and control, right? That the world is about somebody has to be in charge of somebody else, because if they don't, then chaos will ensue, right? And so the way we see the world, the way we feel the world is through this lens, this fiat lens of saying someone that I'm working with, someone that I'm living with, I feel the need to control them, right? Because that's what I've been told. Somebody has to be in control. And so we have this idea that we need to apply force on each other, control one another, and especially in organized systems like work, government, right? Where we have this automatic desire to feel that we need to control the other person, or somebody needs to be in control because people just being themselves isn't enough.
Now, that belief is also part of the fiat hoax, if you will, right? It's built into this idea that all that is needed. So let's just dig into what it looks like a little bit, in a real life example, because you hear a lot about, we just need more servant leaders, people willing to serve others. But then you hire a servant leader. Let's say you've had a dictator type CEO and you hire a servant leader who's a new CEO. They come into the organization, and within a few months, that servant CEO is just as bad as the dictator who just left. How did that happen? So Let's talk a little bit about the system that is so embedded that it can cause even the nicest of people with well-intention to become fear-oriented. What does it look like? What causes us the problem? What causes us to become a problem?
Exactly. And so it's actually interesting because fiat isn't just in our heads. Fiat, because it was in other people's heads in the past, it's become systematized. So we have a system of government, a system of work, a system of companies that has inside of them is built this concept of fiat. it's built the idea that we need to control. And so when I come in as, I was a VP of a corporation. I come in to do that work. I don't walk in just as my lens and how I see the work. I actually walk into an environment that was built by a bunch of Fiat lenses. And so I have to abide by that structure that was Fiat in the first place. So as a VP, I have to play the role of VP. I have to have the game of competing with the other VPs, controlling and managing my managers and directors. I have to, appease the CEO and the board, right? All of this stuff, this managing up and managing down. We have the language that describes it, right?
Yeah.
Right?
It's its own culture, managing
It's
up,
its own
managing
culture, right?
down, CYA tactics. It's like we've created a whole acronym around it too.
Right. The whole place of work, we
Yeah.
don't see it because we've looking at it through this Fiat lens. If we could flip the Fiat lens and actually see clearly what we're looking at in the workplace, what we see is that there is control and force happening on us. And when we lower the lens, we go, oh, this is normal. But when we lift the lens, we realize, holy cow, this is not normal at all. That the only reason that we accept it, the only reason that it seems normal is because the lens itself.
The very first time, I want to talk a little bit about the when the lens sort of get lifted. The very first time I saw the lens lifted, and too bad that Matt isn't here because he was at this meeting with me and a few others. We met with the new quote unquote owners of the company, and the CEO was so proud about the structure of the organization, how there were these managing directors or presidents of business units that had hire control, like complete autonomy. The pride moment was that there was this tremendous autonomy. They had complete control to do the firing, the hiring within their organization. And of course, we were not operating that way as a company. We were operating more as a collaborative, self-managed environment. And I remember thinking, boy, why would you want one person to have that kind of authority? That's a lot of authority for just one person to have. I mean, how do you know that that person doesn't need I don't know, maybe they have a mental illness or something? How can you trust that they're going to make the right decision every single time? And why would that person want to have that pressure to be the one person who makes all these decisions? And it was that moment when I realized most companies are structured that way. And the idea of empowerment is having a business unit head who can make those decisions. That is decentralization according to the Fiat environment. But is it? I mean, let's talk about the alternative. What would the alternative look like?
Well, before we go to the alternative, I think that what you're saying is really profound. We think that distributing control to people that have ultimate control at the top is what our society is built on. Freedom for somebody to be the boss.
And everybody's striving towards it.
And everybody's striving to be the one that's the boss.
We have all kinds of words for it. Climbing the ladder.
Exactly. And really what that is that you have increased levels of control over other people. And we don't recognize that as being the real operating factor there. And that's why we call it Fiat, because when you're the one that has the control, then what happens is what you were saying a minute ago. Holy shit, what the hell do I do with this? Why do I want to have all this power? I'm all of a sudden, those people, having been there in the C-suite, I realize as much fun as it is to get paid a lot of bucks, it's also really freaking stressful, right? And you have people's livelihoods in your hands, and you shouldn't, and you shouldn't, but still that's just the reality. And so you end up acting from that fiat lens and doing the things that the system wants you to do and regretting them, going back home and going, why the hell did I do that today? Right? Why did I kowtow to the board, to the CEO, to the system, and treat others in the way that I did?
Well, it's even worse because you're actually convinced that freedom comes from climbing that ladder, getting to that place where you have the most power, where you have more influence over others than those who have influence over you, which is why everybody's striving for the top of the ladder, right? Because that's the place where I don't have to answer to anybody, but you always have someone to answer to, whether it's the
Exactly.
board or you have to answer to the street. You're answering to someone, right? But there's this hoax built in that says as long as you're moving up the ladder, you get to achieve more freedom. But actually, you end up being more of a slave to the system because now you have to maintain this persona
and maintain the system.
This system, it's a self-feeding machine, and you often end up being duplicitous. You have to put on one mask when you go to the office, and then you take the mask off, and when you're home, you're a different person with your spouse and your kids. It's exhausting. Let's admit it. Anyone who's in that position, if you're watching, it's exhausting.
Absolutely. It's worse than that because you're in the boardroom, you can put on one mask, right? You're in a boardroom with your peers, you can put on a mask. Now, the second you've got direct reports coming into that room, it's a different mask.
Yep.
Right? Now you're talking to the board, it's a different mask. Right? You're having to change to maintain the false narrative of whatever that context is. Right? And I remember being in the boardroom with management and talking about staff. Everybody's talking about staff in a way that they would never talk about staff if the staff was present. Right?
Yeah, exactly. It's like you can't be yourself. You have to be a different person for the different circumstance. And it's built into the system. It's how it is. It's self-sustaining. And so organizations end up being structured this way, right? With this idea that the upper echelons have more freedom of voice to each other. The other ones have to play by different rules. And if you play by those rules, you earn your way to the other upper echelons where you get a little more freedom. And then there's new sets of rules there to get to the next level of the echelon and so on and so forth. It's exhausting. But at the same time, it doesn't serve anyone.
Well, it does. It served a need. I think Fiat emerged because it served a need. Okay. It emerged because we had a level of complexity that got bigger and bigger and bigger. And early on in our evolution, in the last, say, couple hundred years, most people were not educated. Right? So let's say you're Ford and you want to set up a factory. And the only people that are willing to work in a factory are people that used to work in a farm. They're not people that graduated college, right? So you bring them in and they don't know how to read and they don't know how to write and they don't understand complex systems. So you treat them like dummies. And you manage it in that way and you build systems of control. Now, a couple hundred years later, guess what? Almost everybody goes to university. Almost everybody fully understands stuff better than their bosses. And we're still treating them like they're dummies.
Exactly. It's like we put lipstick on the pig and stop calling monarchy and call it something else, because that's really what we just described, right? But now you've got an educated group of people, but they're still under the monarchy.
Exactly.
If you're not part of the court, you're just a peasant, right?
Exactly.
So
exactly.
We have the same system. We just call it something else.
Exactly. And not only have they become, we collectively have become so much more educated. So we can grasp and understand these things in ways that The system was built for people who couldn't. But also, we now have tools. Here we are talking to each other. You're in Southern California, I'm in Northern California, and we're talking to each other on this device. Imagine a couple of 100 years ago, someone in a factory in Southern California and someone in a factory in Northern California, how long it would take to get messages back and forth to each other, right? So it was a very different world. You needed a whole bunch of people in the middle to make things work. Nowadays, we can work between each other in ways that were impossible, literally impossible, for kings to do 150 years ago, much less for the average business person. So things have changed dramatically.
So the system was in place to a certain degree, like we said, you know, you needed to have all these people in place if you needed to communicate something from one place to another. I mean, it could take weeks, sometimes months, depending where you needed to go. So that kind of made sense. And you had a bunch of people not educated, so you had to tell them what to do, when to do it, how to do it. But now that's changed. But yet we have the same mindset and framework that we're operating under.
Right.
So what's next, right? It feels like we've fixed the cause of the disparity between the upper echelons and everybody else, but we've maintained the structure, even though there's no reason to have the structure. And now, in some industries, we've seen people break that structure. For example, in the music industry, people started self-publishing. They broke that structure. In other industries, the same has happened. So we're seeing tremendous progress where people's like, nah, I'm not going to be on the record label's thumb. I'm going to do my own thing. And a lot of celebrities have done very well with that. So
that's exactly what's happening
here. A mindset shift needs to happen. What do you think that is?
I don't think that it needs to happen. I think it's happening. I think that the reason we're talking about this is because that mindset shift has happened to us, and it's happened to other people in our industry of this transformation of work. And it's happening, as you said, in other domains, in other places. There are people doing this kind of work, thinking about this lens and the impact of it in legal, in finance, and you name it, they're doing it, right? So it's not that this has to emerge. It's emerging. What I think needs to happen is that we need, those of us who are at the leading edge of this emergence, need to build the language, build the narratives of what is happening, so that others who have not had the time to discover this for themselves, because they're too busy doing their 9-to-5 job, right? They're too busy trying to make ends meet to spend the thousands of hours that we've spent talking to each other, learning from each other, exploring things, writing books, doing all of this stuff. It's not because we're smarter than they are. It's because we had the time to spend on it, right? And the experience to bring to that time. And so if we can facilitate by bringing this knowledge to them, they will have words for what they already feel.
You said something really interesting, and it resonated with me as I was looking at the various eras that we've been through, from the agricultural age to the industrial age to the information age, and now really sort of the age of self, or the division of labor, as I like to call it. But it took 400 years to shift from the agricultural age to the industrial age. Many industrial inventions were made 400 years before the shift happened. If you ever studied the life of Michelangelo, you'll see he was a prolific inventor. A lot of industrial things that most of the things didn't get used till like 400 years later, because there was this, I'm a farmer, this is what I do, I respond to the monarchy. So there was also no way to communicate all these things were happening. Now we have instant access to communication, ability to share information. AI is a major equalizer, right? There's no one who has more capability than anybody else, because I could just use AI and I can level up instantly to anybody else who's an expert. So the time should be a lot shorter, but there's some anchors in place, some strong anchors in place that are not going to be in favor of this. What do you think those are, and how do we get past those?
Well, there are two key ones. One is our belief that this lens is glued on.
Oh, that it's part of us.
It's part of us, right? We think this is the way the world is. The lens itself is that belief, right? So the recognizing that there is a way to move away from that. In the next episode, we'll talk about how we flip the lens, but and what's underneath. Once we flip the lens, what's underneath. But so that's number one. It is that we don't actually have the permission to believe that's bullshit, right? We just think that's the way it is. Like our parents, everybody's been telling us all of our lives, yeah, it sucks, but that's the way it is. Yeah, it's stupid, but that's the way it is. We knew that the way work works is not good. We knew that the way school works.
Before you go to the second one, do you know the story about the little elephant who became a giant elephant?
I don't.
Because this is very appropriate. There was a small elephant that was tied to a pole, and it tried to break away from the pole, but it wasn't strong enough. And it tried for a long time, and it wasn't strong enough. And as it kept trying, it kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And eventually it stopped trying because it convinced himself that I can't break free. I'm tied to this pole. Now, this elephant, behemoth giant, could break away from that pole instantly. Wouldn't even take much of an effort, but doesn't even try because they believe I can't.
Yeah.
That's what you just described.
That's exactly what, yes. And I do know that fable, but that is the most important part. The number one is the most important part is the recognition that this lens is one that was given to us by people who thought they were doing the best that they could, because they were taught that that's the way to do it. They taught us that's the way to do it. And so that's number one. Number two is we've built systems that even if all of us flipped our lens, that the system hasn't changed, because the system isn't a lens in itself. The system is ossified lens. In other words, it's turned into hard structures because they were built by people who were wearing the lens. And so you go to work, and if you've got your lens flipped, the system of work is still that structure. And so we need to also change the structures with which we collaborate, structures within which we live, structures within which we govern, because those structures, when seen through the other lens, no longer make any sense. We need new organizations. We need new ways of governing ourselves, because you can't have this lens, this radical lens, we call it. You can't have that radical lens and look at these systems and have them resonate. They are dissonant to how the reality of who we are is.
And this is why we often say radical is actually real life, because what we're experiencing now is, even if you remove the lens, the view has been hard coded. It was just the view. Now it's become reality that we've hard coded. And as a result, the system keeps pushing us into this mindset, even though we no longer have it. And so as a result, the radical idea is that what if we just went back to the way it was, where like nature is constantly in a state of giving, and we don't have all these systems in place because it was based on being blind.
Well, and I like the way you say that, because in the software development world, you try not to hard code too much stuff, right? Because variables change, context changes, and so the more you hard code, the more your system is likely to break. That's what's happened to us. Yeah. We've hard coded our society. I love that terminology. Thank you for that. We've hard-coded our society so much that now transforming it is going to be much harder than if all we had to do was flip the lens. It's hard enough to flip the lens. It's hard enough to realize that I've got a lens that I'm looking at. But then there's also the fact that I've also got to change this hard-coded society.
All right. So we're going to invite you to come back and hear how we uncode the system. How do we unblock what we've created? How do we undo what those lenses have caused us to do? And I say undo because it's not really a transformation. It's just undoing what we were doing based on a view that was passed down from generation to generation that was never supposed to be there to begin with. So come back as we talk about ways that we can break free of the hard-coded Fiat system that we're in. And who knows, you might learn something you can apply at work or in your family or in your community that might benefit a lot of people. So come back again as we talk about the Radical World, the podcast with the pioneers of Radical. Again, thanks for joining us, and see you again soon.
See you in a couple of weeks.